Russian Defense Ministry confirms its military launched large-scale strike on Ukraine during the night of June 6. In response to Ukraine's cyber operation, the Russian Defense Ministry's announcement comes after Ukraine accuses Russia of launching a series of missiles and drones on the capital in the early morning of June 6. According to the Russian Defense Ministry, the attack featured a variety of high-precision long-range weapons launched from the air, sea and land, as well as attack drones. The purpose of the strike was in response to Ukraine's recent terrorist acts. The targets of the attack included design bureaus, weapons production and repair facilities, drone arms flight training centers, as well as depots and military equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine. The Russian Defense Ministry confirms all targets, weapons, and military equipment of the armed forces of Ukraine all were hit. This is the sixth joint attack on military-related targets in Ukraine by the Russian military. Since 31 May last week, Russia accused Ukraine of being behind bombings of railway bridges in Russia that cut off the wheels of cargo and civilian trains, killing at least 7 people and injuring more than 120 over the weekend. Ukraine also launched a Spiderweb operation using drones to attack air bases, causing serious damage to a series of Russian bombers. According to the Kiev Independent Avoid Office, Ukrainian President Andrei Ma has spoken out about the possibility of a meeting between President Zelensky and President Donald Trump in mid-June, according to which, speaking on television on 6 June, Andrei said that the two and Ukrainian leaders could hold a bilateral meeting on the sidelines of the G7 summit. The G7 summit is scheduled to take place from 15 to 17 June in Cannes, Alberta, Canada. He said the recent trip of the Ukrainian delegation to Washington was part of efforts to push ahead for a high-level meeting between Zelensky and Trump before a Ukrainian delegation led by First Deputy Prime Minister and Economy Minister Julia Rudenko arrived in the U.S. on the morning of June. The delegation also included senior officials from the Ukrainian Defense Ministry and the President's office. The trip came shortly after President Zelensky's announcement on June 2nd that Ukraine was seeking defense agreements and a free trade agreement with the United States. Zelensky said at the time, "I discussed this with President Donald Trump. We want to buy weapons. This is the purpose of the agreement. There are no gifts." During the visit, Ukrainian officials are said to have discussed with their U.S. counterparts a range of key issues, including the talks in Istanbul, demands for sanctions against Russia, and aid to Ukraine amid Russia's advances on the battlefield. Following the latest round of peace talks between Ukraine and Russia on June, Turkish President Recep Erdogan has suggested that his country plans to facilitate a meeting between the leaders of Russia and Ukraine in Ankara or Istanbul. Speaking to reporters on the same day, Zelensky expressed his readiness to take part in such talks. On June 2nd, the White House also issued a statement saying that U.S. President Donald Trump is willing to meet his Russian and Ukrainian counterparts in Turkey after the two sides failed to make much progress in their talks, in Istanbul about a ceasefire. Gremlin speaks out after as President Donald Trump says Russia and Ukraine are like two kids fighting and sometimes don't rush to stop them. Gremlin spokesman Dmitry Bikopi, 6 June comments, "Of course the US president can have his own views on what is happening, but for us this is a matter of life and death, a matter of national interest, a matter of our future security and our children's future, the future of our country." Asked to comment on previous remarks by President Donald Trump, Peskov said Russia was grateful to Theus for its efforts to mediate and it was important to continue to maintain contacts with Washington. The U.S. leader compared Russia and Ukraine to kids fighting in a park and suggested that perhaps they should be allowed to continue fighting for a while. Mr. Trump said in meeting with German Chancellor Friedrich M. at the White House on June 6th. "Sometimes we see two children fighting. Sometimes we let them fight for a while before we step in to stop them." Trump said he had mentioned this comparison in a phone call earlier this week with Putin. Trump recalled, "I said you can continue to fight and suffer significant losses, just like in hockey or other sports where the referees often let the sides fight. for a few seconds before separating them shortly after returning to the White House. Earlier this year, Trump attempted to play a mediating role in ending the more than 3-year conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But the reality has shown that resolving the conflict is much more complicated than Trump. The US has already claimed it could end the fighting in Russia-Ukraine within 24 hours. Trump is now warning that he may stop his mediation role if the sides do not work to push for a peace deal despite US mediation efforts. Russia and Ukraine continue to attack each other during talks. No breakthrough. New York Times cites informed sources as saying Trump frustrated with both Russian President Vladimir Putin and Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky. White House chief continued to criticize Ukraine's leader, but appeared more restrained toward Putin and believed good relations between them could end the conflict when asked if he would impose tougher sanctions on Russia. He said he was open to the possibility of sanctions on both Russia and Ukraine because it takes two hands to clap to make a sound.